Okay, amazing. So before we jump right into, how you got into the wellness coaching and into the wellness space, you mentioned something about, searching for meaning earlier on in your life, and you moved from country to country, different jobs from one job to the other, but for some reason you kept on feeling very, very disconnected. What exactly was it that you were, running from, or what exactly were you looking for, making those rapid changes in that period of time?
Yeah, as you say it to me there, I think it took me until my late 30s to really realize what it was. And the word that's just come to me there was fulfillment. So,
Okay.
I always kind of felt like the next job or the next relationship or the next country will I'll feel better then. And then once I got that, job or I moved to another country, I'd sit there and I'd be like, oh, I still feel the same. This kind of like, lack of fulfillment is really what I mean. So this kind of, I couldn't really understand what this was. I was like, I'd gotten everything that I was manifesting, whether it was, as I said, new jobs or new countries or, anything really that I put my mind to. And once I had that or I was experiencing it, it I was kind of like, oh, is that it? And at one stage when I
Yeah.
was, in my 30s, I was like, okay, hang on a minute, like something isn't adding up here. Like this seems to be a pattern, I got
Yeah.
really into metacognition and really trying to observe myself, my thoughts. And I was like, okay, you've ran from all of these different places, gone to all these different things, like what's missing? And really it wasn't until I got into some of the deeper work on myself that I realized that my problem was my connection to myself. I didn't have one really. I was
Okay.
looking
Well,
for I was looking for validation in outside achievements, outside titles, outside materialistic, means, whether that was more money, more bonuses. And I realized, okay, it was the inner work I needed to do on myself where, I could feel this fulfillment finally.
okay. I mean, I think a lot of people also are stuck in that loop. They also, they feel like they need to have a particular job or they need to be in a particular environment for them to feel some sense of fulfillment. And it just never seems to come. So would you say that it's a thing of a place or a career path? Because a lot of people do think that, their fulfillment is going to come from either a particular career and, they go all out to get something. So do you think that fulfillment comes from, a career path or a thing? Or is it something that you just find in yourself anywhere? How would we
Yes.
particularly picture that?
It's a tough one, right? Because look, we live in the world that we live in and we all have to, put like food on the table, right? So we all need something to make money. I think what happens to some people, and I know what happened to me, my identity got wrapped up in my job and in my job title. And so what happens with that is that what ends up happening is you derive your value as a human being related to the career that you're in. Now, for some people, that can be very fulfilling. Like I have lots of friends
Mhm.
who are
Yeah,
doctors and
true.
they get a lot of like they know that their purpose in life is to save lives and to help people when they're in distress. Personally, I struggled to feel that in the work that I was in because I was in very operational sort of roles. It was more like task based work. I didn't feel like my work was really fulfilling in that sense. You'd complete projects and they'd go well, but I was like, okay, well, who did I impact today? Whose life did I make better as a result of something that I did? So I think often what happens with people when they're in unfulfilling careers or jobs, they might associate it with, I just don't get on with my boss, right? And then they move and go to another company that's very similar and they find themselves in similar patterns, right? And I have friends like this or people that I've worked with. And what they're not realizing is that maybe they're attracting or they're going into certain roles that is actually connected to maybe some wounds that they haven't healed, right? And
True.
so you know what I mean? As in, we might attract a certain manager that would represent a parent in our life, right? And so we have a hard time, and if our relationship with that parent, hasn't gone so well, we have a hard time of disconnecting our own inner work to, the job that we're in. And we automatically think it's the job. But really what it is, it's your stuff, right? That you maybe haven't worked through that you're bringing into the job. So I think fulfillment is a very complex topic, and it really depends on someone's values, what they value in life, like, and what their strengths are. And I
Yeah.
think for the vast majority of people, I think it's a tough exercise to do. And that's where coaching is actually very helpful, because you can actually co-explore, well, what are my key values? And more often than not, people realize, oh, okay, like I'm in this career or I'm in this environment that goes against my values. And that's why they feel this lack of fulfillment. It's not necessarily the work, but it might be the environment that they're in or the values that the company has.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because particularly for me, at the initial phase of my life, I was studying engineering because I thought that I
Okay.
wanted to become an engineer. And eventually I realized that, all of those things are just influences from my environment. My dad always had a way of putting engineering in front of us while we were growing up. And so I just thought, I had to be an engineer to become very fulfilled in life. Not until I realized that, oh, this is not, I'm not enjoying any of these things. Yeah. And I decided to just switch paths. So everything you've said makes a lot of sense. And I really appreciate it. So, um, what exactly is it that you do in the wellness space? I see that you're a Reiki specialist, you also deal with sounds. To be very honest, I've never had any encounter with anybody like yourself. So I'm actually very
Mhm.
curious to know what it is that you do, or what all of your practice entail.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm getting that quite a lot, actually. And funnily enough, some people asking, like, what is that? I suppose before I kind
Yeah.
of tell you what they are, Martin, the reason for it is everything that I offer is something that has worked for me on my own personal growth journey. So, while I've spent 15 years in traditional corporate
Okay.
roles, I've also alongside this always had this, I suppose, desire to understand myself a lot better and to help balance myself, having been in these high pressure environments. So along the way, a lot of energy healing practices is what I like to offer. So Reiki is a Japanese healing technique, and it's a very light, hands-on approach to bringing someone into a meditative state, but really just helping them rebalance their body, mind, and spirit. And you'll probably see a lot of these different, I know sound healing or sound baths, perhaps on your side of the world, is what people refer to it. That's as old as time, right? People in, indigenous tribes have been using drums or any sort of instruments of their voice to help people come into a state where they're able to just be fully present. So I like to offer these techniques either one on one. I also offer them in group settings, depending on the scenario. And I do these to help people who are, more often than not, they're people that are pretty stressed. They're dealing with a difficulty in their life, and they just need to feel a little bit of relief and pressure. I also offer a lot of coaching and mentoring. Obviously, given my business experience, I can obviously mentor a lot of people in career space and so on. So I have all of these kind of blends of techniques and tools, because some people, quite often, I will actually blend it a little bit. So to give you an example, I could be in a coaching session with someone that's having like a particularly, tough experience about discussing something that might be quite tense for them. If there's something going on with work or they're dealing with a difficult coworker, what I'll do with some of the training that I've learned, and there's a whole host of other things that I've kind of gotten into, but somatic techniques are very powerful. And what that means is, in coaching, we're very much in our mind, right? We use the power of our mind to create, whatever we want to articulate, but a lot goes on in the body as well, right? So when we're talking about something that's very stressful for us, our brain is so powerful that we create that stress response. We've all been there, right? Where we're getting ready for an
Definitely.
interview and we're sitting there, we're like, "Ugh," and you feel like your body doesn't know whether you're actually in the savannah being like chased by a tiger, or that, it's just an interviewer that's here to ask you a few questions. So I see the same response in coaching when we're talking about topics that are quite vulnerable. So what I'll do in that instance is I'll just ask the person to take a few breaths with me, and we'll get into our body and we'll just feel into that. And like the power of your breath, I just had a client earlier who has a very important job interview to do. And I just walked her through, some box breathing. And, I could see the wheels just, the kind of pressure valve just coming down a tiny bit. So that's how I like to blend what I offer. And I'm still evolving, Martin, if I'm honest. I'm still seeing
Yeah.
what people want, and offering, discussions like this with people like yourself, master classes online. I like to empower people. So there's a lot of there's a lot that I feel passionate about by helping people find their own inner clarity and confidence, because I believe we all have that. It's just hard to get to it sometimes. And that's where body
Yeah.
work, whether it's energy healing or if it's coaching, sometimes the blend is actually quite helpful.
Sure. And I mean, it's super, super helpful, especially in this era that we are in, that is super fast paced. Everything is moving. There is no slowing down. I think this becomes very important. How exactly did you decide to, go into this niche? I mean, the wellness space is very vast, but you chose this. Is there something personal to the space to you, or was it a recommendation? How exactly did you find yourself there?
Do you know, it kind of came as a result of people asking me to literally give them services, even though I wasn't fully established. So what I mean by that is,
Okay.
throughout the last 15 years, while I had my typical day job, I would have people asking me, well, can you run a sound bath for me? Can you give me some Reiki? Can you help me with some coaching? And so it kind of came together when, last summer I had an opportunity to leave the corporate world. And I was like, okay, I can either get back on the hamster wheel and go into another, corporate job, or I can actually maybe give this a go. And so I gave it a go. And, I think what kind of drove me to that is just seeing the relief on somebody's face after a coaching session or after a Reiki session or after a sound bath, that people are so, as you said, this world is so crazy, right? And we're in our minds more than ever. And that creates so much noise for people. And so really I wanted to become part of a solution and helping people just find themselves again. So it's been a personal quest of myself to do that for me. I won't lie, Martin, it's a lifelong journey. So don't think that you just find
Yeah.
yourself and like box tick, like the
Yeah.
biggest kind of realization you have is like, oh, okay, this doesn't end, right? And that's the beauty in it. And look, it's difficult work. If you're going to do this sort of work, and I'm sure, you work with a lot of coaches as well, more often than not,
Yeah.
most coaches have gone through their own version of transformation or their own big life change, and then they're called to give that back to others. That's kind of where I'm at. I'd rather put my energy into helping people in what way I can, and what works for people. And I find a lot of what I offer is the most accessible for people.
Okay. That's beautiful to hear. And the fact that it's rooted in helping people makes it very, very,
Mhm.
amazing. Yeah. So I was trying to do some research on, Reiki, and because obviously I'm just hearing about it for the first time. I'm not even going to lie. I'm stumbling on your profile on Substack and reading a few of your pieces. And in my findings and research, I can see that there are two parties, right? Some scientists don't believe that this works. They believe that it's pseudoscience or it's some magical thing. They're just two thorn sides, that this works or this is not real. How would you answer that? And, I'm just asking out of curiosity because I'm just
Yeah.
finding about it right now. Oh,
Well, my background is actually in science. So people kind of are, I have a degree in chemistry, right? So people are always like, how
yeah, I
did
saw
you
that.
end up? Yeah, how did you end up here? And so, really, I think and I will answer your question, but just to give you some context, everything in the universe is energy, right? And anyone that's studied
True.
any sort of science, and if you study any sort of quantum physics, is energy, right? And so when some people who are skeptical say this can't work, right? What I say usually to people is like, well, come and try it out and see how you feel, right? Now, there you'll never see people, like anyone that tells you this is definitely going to cure cancer or this is definitely going to do XYZ, there's no certainty in life, right? There's no clinical trials that are going to, like, there is some research on sound healing in Deepak Chopra's center, I know. So he's done a lot of clinical trials on proving the science behind sound healing. So there's an awful lot of scientists getting to that because they can measure the brain waves, right? I haven't
Hmm.
personally kind of gone down the rabbit hole of like Reiki clinical trials or any sort of trials to prove it. But what I would say is, what does it feel like to have a hug from someone that you love, right? When we hug or have a
Very
connection with
beautiful.
someone, because you're releasing all sorts of like good hormones, oxytocin, dopamine, all of this stuff, right? And your body feels safe, right? When you're having a healing modality therapy. Now, I will preface by saying that some Reiki practitioners don't use hands on healing, right? So, for your listeners, for people that don't know what Reiki is essentially a hands on healing. You lie typically on a bed or you can sit, you're fully clothed. And what it means is there is different hand positions and movements that are, working all the way from the crown of your head all the way to your toes. There's different energy centers. So an awful lot of maybe your Asian listeners will know that like chakras are a very big theme in yoga. It's a Sanskrit word for energy wheel. Okay. And really what that means is when you're doing any sort of healing, you're unblocking these different energy centers that we have. So to bring that down to like something that's really tangible, we talked about going for an interview. Have you ever gone to an interview and you felt sick to your stomach?
Yes, the first few
Yeah,
interviews I ever did, I was sweating. I could barely talk. So yeah,
yeah,
I felt that.
yeah. So this like center here where your stomach is known as the solar
Mhm.
plexus. Okay, and this is the center
Okay.
for your personal power, confidence, right, self esteem. So you can imagine that you're swirling around thoughts in your mind. You're like, I'm not good enough for this interview. I'm not gonna, I don't have enough experience, whatever that is. All of that energy from your mind is getting stuck down at this center, right? Because each of these centers represent different things, right? To give you an example, when people are feeling scarcity or really fearful, the center for that is in your root. So quite often people might have feel really unwell and have to go to the bathroom quite badly, right? So again, that's all
Oh,
connected. So in any sort of energy healing, because it's not just Reiki, by the way, there's lots of amazing therapies out there like reflexology, acupuncture, all of these different modalities. There's a lot of them, and they will all target all these energy centers to help you unblock energy that you have trapped. Now, when I say energy, and we bring it back to quantum physics, right? Your thoughts
yes.
create energy into your mind, right? And there's loads of people that do make a lot of money off manifestation or the power of your mind. You can even type that in, and there's someone that probably has tagline that. But your thoughts create the emotions in your body, and those emotions create your reality. And so, we can't think our way out of a problem all the time, right? Obviously, we can do
True.
coaching and therapy, right? I do this myself, but quite often you'll still have that pain, and you might be able to eat for that night. So how do you get rid of that? Now, you don't just have to use Reiki to get rid of it. You might go for a run, you might go for a walk to get rid of that. But a lot of the,
Hmm.
Eastern cultures believe in the importance of getting rid of the energy. So Reiki is a really powerful way by using this hands-on touch on these centers. There is obviously a lot of training that goes into it because we visualize certain symbols and techniques that specifically unblock these areas. And, I'd be very surprised, and I've never had a client that didn't fall asleep or didn't feel so relaxed and bring themselves into a
Oh,
space where they're like, oh, wow, and they come back. So, to the skeptics out there, Martin, I would say, just give it a go and see for yourself.
oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. And does sound healing fall under Reiki, or are they separate entities?
Hi, Martin.
Sorry, I lost you for a while. Can you hear me
I
now?
can. I can. All good. I was just finishing off saying the piece around, it, saying to people, give it a go and, experience it for yourself because, it's all about feeling into the body and, experiencing it that way. But I'll let you bring us back into it.
Yeah, so I was asking, is sound healing under Reiki, or are they separate, two separate entities?
They would be considered separate modalities. So the word is modality, right? So that's generally a good term for any sort of technique or tool that helps bring some sort of balance and restoration to the body and mind. You'll generally hear that word used for like non-traditional or non-medical traditional forms of therapy, if you get me. So sound healing is as old as we are as humans. It's like it's a very broad term, like the word medicine in a sense. And what I mean by that is sound healing, and it's become more popular because a lot of the benefits now are being measured properly in trials, and there's an awful lot more kind of people who are well known getting into it. And the monks in Asia have been doing this for centuries, right? So this isn't. It's just become popular. Yeah, it's just become popularized in the West because sound baths is generally what people might be used to, right? So you'll see things like where people are lying down on a mat, like a yoga mat. They might have a blindfold on, and they're literally in this room for an hour where there's different instruments being played, whether that's gongs or whether it's crystal bowls or whether it's chimes or it's people chanting. That's sound healing. You're going to have this, get yourself into this meditative state, or what some people would, often call yoga nidra is another term that some people would say, right, we're going to do some yoga nidra. But it's really just all about dropping into your body. So the difference between Reiki and sound healing would be that there wouldn't be, well, typically there wouldn't be any hands-on touch in a sound bath, but I have seen some practitioners put instruments on top of people's bodies. That wouldn't be my practice, if I'm honest. I kind of, when I do sound baths, I much prefer to allow someone experience the waves of the sound, because it's less about what you hear and it's more about the frequency, the energy that you feel from the instruments. And a lot of people don't understand that until they experience it, because I quite often will tell people to put earplugs in a sound bath, because some people get quite sensitive to people that are snoring or that are making a lot of noise. But I was like, you don't have to fall asleep. You're just there with the frequencies of the bowl. So really that energy of the music is doing what Reiki would do, as in, here I am on your stomach, and I'm helping you unblock this nervousness or this lack of confidence that you have. Whereas in a sound bath, you might be lying there and you might feel actually some energy there as a certain instrument is being played. It's kind of the same thing in a sense, where you're unblocking a lot of the stagnancy of thought and emotions that aren't really serving you anymore. Mhm. Mm, yeah, definitely. Hmm. So funnily enough, people usually come to me when the traditional methods haven't been working, right? Or they have a traditional doctor advising to try these. So what's becoming better and better now is these kind of, multi-modality approaches to healing. So I wouldn't necessarily say you just go to a doctor for one thing and then you just come to me for another. That's not really, it's not really the best way. Now, I know people don't always have the ability to do that, and it really depends on what's going on in your life. But any practitioner in energy healing will always be trained on, look, this is only so much I can do, as I was saying earlier. Like, we can't cure cancer, but we can certainly help the people while they're going through cancer treatment to help their body be in a better state of balance. And I have a teacher that actually, there's an amazing story, if you know, if you would like me to share. And I know this for firsthand because it's my teacher who did it. There was a gentleman who was in hospital, and he was in sepsis, so meaning that his body was shutting down, right? And so the doctors had to completely amputate his arms and his legs. Yeah, big stuff. Yeah, very sad. And it all happened very suddenly and out of the blue. And so the wife, after about a few days, the wife actually rang my Reiki master and said, look, will you please come to the hospital and just see, can you help him? Right? Because he was obviously in a very deep state of, you know, as anyone would be. Anyway, fast forward, and the doctors had said he probably, like, they were surprised he was still alive. They thought he was going to die, if I'm honest with you. And they said, look, you'll probably be in here for, like, I don't think they thought he'd leave hospital. Fast forward 6 months later, she was in with him, giving him a Reiki treatment for weekly. 6 months later, he's left hospital, and he, like, wants to be an advocate for people that, you know, are in a similar situation. Now, she is incredible, and I've known her for 10 years, but the power of just helping someone release that energy in this way. And you can do it, again, as I said, with various different means. But most often when people are doing energy healing, they're also using their words, and they're coaching and mentoring as well. So this is where the blend of somebody, you know, offering what they can offer from their experience can really help somebody. So all of that to say, Martin, my advice to people is, I personally take a multimodality approach to my own healing. I'd often, if I need to go to a general practitioner, I will. Obviously, you go to them for specific things. But if you're stressed and overwhelmed, you'll go to a general practitioner, and they will prescribe you medication to treat a symptom. They will not give you, you know, a means to be able to go after what the root is of that. Okay. And so that's where, you know, it really depends on where somebody's mind frame is at. Do they want to go after the root of what's causing their stress and, you know, their anxiety, or do they just need a coping mechanism for a short time? Because a lot of people, when they come, or if they're coming for coaching, and I find this quite a lot, people want to be coached, but they get to a certain session and things get tough because you're talking about deep stuff that you don't have the answers to. Painful things, but, you know, there's no amount of medication in the world that's going to get rid of that pain. What's going to get rid of it is your dedication to seeing whoever in the world of medicinal health, or in, you know, energy health, or any sort of therapy, you know, can help you, because you can come at yourself from different angles. And that's what I personally did. So I go to all of those things. Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm. So you so your question is, what's your advice living in this fast-paced world when you've got this pressures to work, and how can we exist, I suppose, more in balance, essentially, is what you're asking me. Is that the question? Okay. So I had an interesting discussion on another podcast, and I have this hypothesis that a lot of people know how to relax, but they don't know how to restore. And what I mean by that is, We can all go home and relax and watch a series on Netflix. I'm guilty of this, by the way, right? But I'm gonna I'm going to, like, so you work your 8-10 hour job, right? And you're gonna go home, you make a quick ready meal dinner, whatever. That's like, there's no judgment on that. But you go and relax in front of the TV for 3 hours and get lost in a Netflix series, right? And you're relaxing. Some people think that's relaxing, okay? And it might be, by the way, or some people come home and they relax with a glass of wine, or they, relax going to a class. But my question to you and your audience is, what are you doing to restore your mind? Because in each of those activities, think about it, right? Your brain uses, I think I read a stat somewhere that your brain uses up to 70 gigabytes of data a day. It has to process that amount of information, right? Everything is online, right? Everything requires you to process information, messages. If you're working in front of a computer for 10 hours a day, you can imagine what you're trying to process, right? So if you come home, right, and you're wondering why you're fatigued, by the way, because you've spent so much time, on the phone first thing in the morning, in work, all of this sort of thing. And if you come home and your answer to relax is putting more information into your brain, right? Because even though, the series or whatever you're watching might be mindless TV. Have you ever heard of this? Mindless TV or mindless scrolling. That's not mindless. It's not mindless because it's taking the energy from your brain. So what I would suggest to you and anyone that feels like this is, what are you doing to try and empty that mind of all of that? What are you going to do? And some practices that and you've just mentioned it already, that you have some, app on your phone that you like to listen to nature. Listening to the sound of nature is so healing. That's why if anyone is ever in a forest and you just go in there, like, you could get lost in there, even for 5 minutes, just gazing. But look, there's some fundamentals. So that's a bit of a rant on restoring, but like tips, right? Like what do I try and do, right? I try and not have phone time for about an hour before I go to bed. We all know the blue light thing, right? As in, you're not really meant to be on screens an hour before you go to sleep because it disrupts your circadian rhythm, right? And your body. Yeah, have you seen this? Yeah. So I know I'm no expert, but like, your body has to go into a certain what's the word? Your body has to get into shutdown mode to go to sleep. Like, you can't just be scrolling and then go to sleep. Some people do, but that, I think, ends up getting your brain into the wrong dopamine cycle, right? And that's why people end up feeling fatigued, because you're just looking for the next hit of like a scroll or some sort of a post. So you need to create some space between these important biological functions of sleep. And sleep is so important. Like, depending on your age and your gender and what's going on in your life, like, you definitely, like most adults, definitely need 6 to 8 hours sleep a night. And the timing of what time you go to sleep is really important as well, because the later you go to bed, the less time your brain can go into a certain rhythm where it actually can detoxify the mind. So if you're going to bed at like 11:30 midnight, your brain is missing out on at least an hour of an important sleep cycle that gets rid of all that 70 gigabytes of data that's been used. So imagine, do you know what's a good analogy? You're like your iPhone and you've got all those photos and you've got a certain like amount of storage. Imagine your brain is your iPhone with your storage. What are you doing to empty out the storage every so often? And it's not what you think it is. It's not the series. It's the time in nature. It's time with people that fill your cup, your family, friends that don't drain you. It's not looking at the phone first thing in the morning, maybe just taking a few breaths with yourself and, thinking about how you want your day to start. And it's making space between you and your bedtime and getting really, really religious about that. And for anyone that's, working at a desk, have a lunch. I didn't have proper lunches for many years. Put the time in the diary to go and have a lunch and be away from the desk, even for 15 minutes. And so taking 2 or 3 of those little tips, and again, habits take time, right? You can't just do this for 3 days and expect miracles. It's like building muscle. You know what I mean? You need to, like, I think there's science on it. And you need to be doing it 60 days for it to be a habit. So, again, you have to want to do the work. Okay. No, actually, I have a real passion for teaching people. Well, like really my whole brand is empowered, I, empower people. So really for me, that's empowering people in all of these, all these different these modalities. Now, right now I can teach people, train people in Reiki. I think my plan is to probably launch some courses in that, definitely in person anyway sooner. Virtual is also an interesting option that I'm curious about. It's kind of harder when it's virtual because it's very much a hands-on technique, but it doesn't mean it's impossible. Lots of people do that. So I definitely have big plans to probably in the autumn to train people on that. Same thing with any sort of sound healing. I do lots of other other energy healings, but again, I'm newer to them, so I like to have a lot of experience under my belt before I start to train people. But really where I want to put a lot of effort, and I would love to have a whole team, Martin, but now it is just me or my sister or my partner that kind of gets roped into it. But really I want to start offering some master classes online. It's something I used to do when I was in the corporate world. I would just give free, like in the corporations, I would just give free master classes on different topics. So I think that's calling me right now, is to just help people with some really practical, easy advice. Because I think too often we get too caught up in, I have to do this course for 6 months and then I'll know this, or I have to do this. And really all people need now, because there's so much going on in the world. It's like, look, I'm overwhelmed, I'm stressed. What can I do about it? And make it really easy for me, So that's one thing, that's one project that I'm actually, in the midst of creating. So teaching and empowering people is really important to me, because I want to share this gift. It's not just it shouldn't all be all about me. Obviously I bring a lot of experience, and I bring a lot of depth to what I do, but I get more enjoyment out of someone doing something for themselves, and empowering them so that they can move on. Mm, mhm. Oh, it's so difficult. I'm not sure I have to. I don't think I have balance, if I'm honest, Martin. I'm definitely, my background is in a lot of business operations. So, like when I was starting my business, I really grossly underestimated how much effort had to go into it, if I'm honest. And so that, oh my gosh, I was like, how do people do this? And so I have a lot of admiration for people that do that, because I've been through it now myself. Um, Look, I don't have the balance right now, but what I do love doing is sharing what I can through the power of writing, like where we obviously met with my writing, and I have been doing that for a number of years in other formats. So I kind of recently joined Substack. I find it easier to write. So I find, okay, I can get one cohort of people that like reading Substack and they're on that. And like, the themes will be the same. I have my LinkedIn profile that's more professional. But again, I'll use the similar themes, but I'll tailor it to that audience. And then I have my Instagram, again, slightly different audience, but I will tailor my information. So what I'm trying to do right now in terms of finding balance is I'll kind of lean into a theme of what's going on or what I see is happening with across my client base, and I'll write content or I'll create content and repurpose it across the different platforms specific to the audience. So that's what I try and do to try and balance my creative time. In terms of my physical time, that's I'm still kind of getting used to that, right? I'm like what you were saying, you work, I think, quite late. I've now had to adjust my working hours to, working quite late. So I'm still finding the balance in that. But what I did do, which I recommend everyone does, even in their own life, is, at the end of each month or quarter, carve out an hour for yourself and go, how did I do last quarter? What was working well for me? What, could be changed? What could I do differently? And I found that really helpful because it's very easy as an entrepreneur to get wrapped up in operational execution and not spend enough time going, am I still on track with my purpose here? Am I doing what brings me into flow? What's going on with like having a look at your numbers, like who's coming to me? Is this seasonal? And so on. So I can empathize with that entrepreneur. But there's so much technology now that we could be using for a lot of online stuff. You, so it's about getting smarter with your time, I think. Oh, do a lot, but like what's relevant? I go for a walk literally every day. And I try and if I can get into a forest, like I live in the suburbs of Dublin here in Ireland, so like we're very fortunate to have forests, but I try and get into nature at least once a day, even if I can only do 20 minutes. 20 minutes is better than no minutes. So I'd like to do an hour. I'd like to do an hour every day, but that's not always possible. So I do what I can. Move the body. Move the body. Yeah. Yeah. Get the energy out. You have to. Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, you're doing really important work. Sometimes it feels like you're in a void and you're asking yourself, what are you doing? But just come back to your purpose, to your why, and remember that one time maybe someone gave you that positive word or that positive piece of advice and it changed your whole day. Because that's the sort of work that like we need more in the world now. We need more wellness coaches. We need more people that are empowering people. So just keep going one foot in front of the other and believe in yourself and come back to the purpose why you're doing it. Thank you, Martin, and thank you for all the work that you're doing. And yeah, so grateful to be here. Thank you. Thank you.